Hey there guys, it's Mark here, one of the hosts of Kino Inferno. I just wanted to drop this in before the intro music because in this episode we are discussing Jonathon Glazer's film Under the Skin, and if you've seen Under the Skin, you likely understand why we're including this, but this is just a little pre-warning to say that Under the Skin is a movie that does deal with some quite heavy and upsetting themes, themes such as sexual violence and victimhood, and we do understand that discussion of those kinds of things can be quite triggering for some people, and just in general, they're not particularly pleasant things to have to talk about or hear about. So this is just a little warning to say that we are going to be discussing things that do pertain to those issues. And another thing that I would like to just quickly drop in as well before we start the show, during our discussion of Under the Skin, there was one aspect of the movie that we just didn't seem to talk about, because obviously we just kind of got into doing the show, and, you know, you can't talk about everything. And it's just to give a little shout out to the film's soundtrack, which was composed by Mika Levi, which is an astonishing collection of music, one of the best soundtracks ever assembled for a film. And if you've seen the movie, you definitely do understand why we're shouting this out. And if you haven't, go and check it out because the music is absolutely incredible and is deserving of much, much praise, which is just sadly something that we just didn't get into on the show. But with those two things out of the way, let's do this. Hello again, guys. Welcome back to yet another episode of Kino Inferno. I'm here with my beautiful co-host, Mr. Aidan Barkadoon.
I am beautiful, and no one can take that away from me.
It's true, nobody can. And I'm your other beautiful co-host. Co-host? Other host. Oh, it's been a long day. Mark, I'm here. Hi.
Your other less beautiful co-host. But still beautiful in his own way. That's
probably the kindest thing that you're going to say about me all day, so I'll take what I can get. It's been a long day.
He has got a massive knob. Though, so, you know, you can do with that what you will.
Oh, I don't know about you, mate, but I'm sweltering today. It's so fucking hot.
Yeah, it is hot. I mean, we are now doing the podcast thing of we're just talking about the weather before we do anything serious. But yeah, currently in the UK, I'm sure I don't need to tell our UK listeners, it is fucking hotter than Satan's ball bag, mate.
It's awful. Like as Aidan may have pointed out on the show previously, but it's become something of a running tradition that usually when we come to doing these recording sessions, I'm either tired, sometimes hungover, or just ill. Like, there's no in between, really. I'm always suffering in some way or another. And this
occasionally he's on the third day of a ketamine binge.
But I mean, yeah, that goes without saying. But usually,
just in case what culture are listening, big cat head.
I'm not going to follow that up with any kind of response.
They're not listening. Ash from What Culture isn't listening to this.
But no, due to this fucking heat, I've not slept properly for a few days. So this is why I'm drinking a coffee at 8:30 at night. Not that that's particularly unusual behaviour for me, but...
Yeah, he's a mad caffeine-addicted, cat binge-loving... social reject. Anyway, we should probably talk about the raison d'etre for this podcast.
No, do you know what? I don't want to now.
You know, you got to take the rough with the
I'm
smooth.
offended.
Look, we polled the listeners and they said they wanted me to diss you more. That's what happened.
Where was this poll? I didn't see this.
Well, it was me and the audience testing kangaroo. The marketing kangaroo. Oh, here it comes now.
So we got the
boing, boing. G'day, mates. Yeah, what it is, right? The listeners, they're not too keen on Mark. They want Aidan to slag him off a bit more. That will increase the ratings. All right, see you later. Boing, boing, boing. My hands are tied, man. Yeah, that's marketing.
I mean, to be fair, that is true. We did hire him. We found him on LinkedIn.
Boing, boing, boing. Still available on LinkedIn. If you need anything promoting, I'm your boy. All right. Catch you later, guys. Boing, 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 boing.
I am genuinely curious, right, as to why our entire HR and staff force is purely animals. Because we have the legal advice bear.
Well,
this
we used to have the
that
legal
suddenly
advice bear.
appeared out of the woodwork.
We used to have the legal advice bear, and for legal reasons, we should not mention how he died.
Oh, well, then we killed him. Yeah.
Well, you say we.
It was mostly me, yeah.
Yeah, he turned.
It was the third day of the binge, mate.
He turned up with the legal advice bear in the back of the car, like Goodfellas.
You are my wolf. That is true.
Anyway.
Also, don't forget the murder rabbit. He was there.
Oh, yeah, well, the Murder Rabbit's not an official employee of Kino Inferno Studios.
No, we just can't get rid of him.
Yeah, we just sort of don't want to get rid of him. He's awful stabby.
Like, we've got his, like, is it P60 you give to somebody when they leave their work?
Yeah, I think so.
Is it P60?
Yeah.
Or is it P45?
I don't know, it's one of them.
Whichever one it is, it's sat there on my desk and I want to give it to him.
But you simply can't.
Yeah, I like my blood being in my body, is what I want
And,
to
you
say
know,
to that.
stabby though he is, murderous though he may be, he does do a round of coffees, so, you know.
He does, and he never asks us to pay him back, which is quite nice.
Yeah, we've never paid him. I'm starting to worry about that.
No.
Anyway.
Yeah, I feel like, this... stay tuned, listeners.
Anyway, that aside, now that the new listeners we may have picked up from episode 1 have definitely turned off, let's get into the meat of the episode. So, obviously, you know...
Yes, we should.
You know, the listeners that are still here who sat through that twaddle. You know, the ones who love the lore that I'm talking to here, the real Kino heads, the Keenies.
The filthy sluts.
They're keen for Kino. They know what we're here for, and what we're here for is to discuss 2 motion pictures, usually from around somewhere between 1996 to 2010. We've gone a little more...
Yeah, that is pretty true, actually.
We've got a little more recent with one of our choices, but one of our choices is squarely 90s nostalgia.
Oh, for sure.
Because today we are covering the theme of Alien Invaders, and we are bringing up Mars Attacks and Under the Skin. Now, we should mention before we get into these films, obviously the Kino Inferno podcast has a hard stance when it comes to aliens, and that stance is get fucking rid of them. Get a shot of them.
I would like to just say that only half of Kino Inferno has that stance towards aliens. Some of us are a bit more open-minded.
Look, all I'm saying is the 2 films that we've picked today, if they prove anything, they prove that aliens are up to no fucking good. And the only solution is murder.
Yeah, that's true. Like, neither of these films paint alien visitors in any kind of positive light, really.
They're a menace, Mark. They're a menace, and we've got to
They
get
are
them.
a menace, this is very true. So, for this episode, you chose Mars Attacks.
A documentary about the alien menace.
Ah, yes, that Tim Burton directed documentary about alien invaders.
Yeah.
So you chose that, which I'm pretty confident most of our listeners have likely seen, because most of our listeners are around our age, and it's definitely a big favourite of people like that.
Yes, they're around our age, 21. We're both 21. I mean, fucking
I've
up.
been 21 for the last 7 years.
I mean, fucking hell, if I'm 21, I have lived.
I'm about to say, yeah, I look at myself in the mirror and go, it's been a hard life, isn't it?
So, anyway, yes.
These past 21 years have not been easy.
So, yes, my choice was Mars Attacks, and your choice was, Mark?
I chose Under the Skin.
From 2014?
Yeah, 2014, that sounds about right.
Is that our
yes,
most recent
we were in...
film? No, it's not, because we did French Dispatch and Buster Scruggs. So, yeah, actually, it's not our most recent film.
We did. We also did our 2020 catch-up episode where we talked about Malignant and Pig. I think those might actually be our 2 most recent films.
Yeah, I forgot about that. We did ones that came out real hot.
It's fine. I think most of our listeners forgot about that one. That's one of our lowest rated episodes.
Yeah, I mean, the Kangaroo has advised that we don't do those kinds of films again.
True, but we got to watch Malignant, and I feel like my life has been better.
Oh, he's coming back in. Boing, 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 boing. Is there any way you could do Cats again? It just seems that the audience really likes that. All right, catch you later, guys. Have a good one. Boing, 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 boing. There he goes, the kangaroo. Anyway, listen, should we play a clip from Mars Attacks?
Yeah, let's get into it.
Professor, what do we know about them?
We know they're extremely advanced technologically, which suggests, very rightfully so, that they're peaceful.
I suspect they have more to fear from us than we from them.
Ladies and gentlemen,
The Martian ambassador is going to say a few words.
come on down, Mr. Ambassador.
Whoa!
That's a Martian? Ew, that's gross. My God.
Should I translate that intro?
Do you know what? I don't think you need to.
Well, I will anyway, for the benefit of the one listener who's still listening. Mars Attacks is a 1996 science fiction black comedy from director Tim Burton, him with the hair, starring just about everyone, in which Earth has its first contact with an alien race, only to find out that they are not as peaceful as they first seem, and their only desire is to destroy our entire society, blow up many famous monuments, perform depraved experiments, and generally cause a nuisance. As things get increasingly hellish, the US government tries in vain to control the invasion, only to be thwarted at every turn. So, Mark.
Very nice.
Marky Mark. Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch.
80 cakes, yes.
The Bussy Papa himself. What is your relationship to Sir Timothy Burton's 1996 Big Timmy Bus, his 1996 opus Mars Attacks? I'll let you
Okay,
Big Timmy Bus.
so Timmy Bus, Timmy Bussy, no, Big Timmy Bus, no. I used to love this film as a kid. It was a film that I watched so many times when I was a kid, and always thought it was just fantastic. And then before this recording, I hadn't actually watched it for quite a while. I think me and some friends may have watched it a couple of years ago, but my memory of that is very hazy at best. But I loved this film as a kid, always thought it was really funny. But honestly, like, now I'm an adult, I actually find it 10 times funnier than I ever did as a kid. I think there's so much more to this film than what I would have, gathered when I was younger. And watching it again for this show, so many jokes and lines of dialogue that would have just completely gone over my head when I was a kid that I found absolutely hilarious this time around.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I watched this at far too young an age, bearing in mind how generally horrific it is. I feel like that's something that is quite common with Tim Burton's oeuvre. Like, I feel like parents kind of see his stuff as like, it's like for kids. And then when you watch a lot of it, it's pretty grim. Especially kind of early Burton, because this is something that I think was interesting watching this, because like yourself, I watched this many times as a kid. I feel that a lot of it probably went over my head. A lot of the non-alien carnage stuff, the more satirical elements probably went over my head. But watching it now, it definitely resonated a lot more. But one thing that struck me watching it now was like, this is very much kind of, this is 96. This is towards the end of Tim Burton's golden run. This is kind of his first flop as well, which we'll probably get into in a bit.
Yeah,
this is also, this is kind of the transition film from Tim Burton's early work, which is very much in that, like, he was a comedy director more or less. Like, if you think of Pee-wee's Big Adventure or Beetlejuice or things like that, like, they're morbid comedies, black comedies in a lot of respects. Batman Returns as well. Obviously, things like Edward Scissorhands is a bit more sincere, but I feel like his aesthetic leans back towards Scissorhands after this movie, and it starts being more the hot topic Tim Burton that we know today. Whereas this movie very much smacks of Tim Burton's kind of interests and particular perversities, but it doesn't have the aesthetic that you ascribe to a Burton movie now, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, well, I've always said that this is simultaneously the most and least Tim Burton movie out of all of his films. Yeah. Like, it's got all of the humour, like you say, particularly all the black humour, which this is probably, like, in terms of that sort of stuff, this is definitely his most extreme film. Like, there's some really quite, like, upsetting content in this film.
Considering this film's like a 12 in this country, there's some pretty upsetting imagery.
Yeah, and like obviously it's more that I think a lot of people don't actually realise that this film is directed by Tim Burton, even though it makes total sense that it would be by him. I think a lot of people see the aesthetic of this film and just immediately don't associate with him. Like, I would say more people probably believe that he directed A Nightmare Before Christmas than he did Mars Attacks, and obviously he didn't direct that movie.
Yeah,
it's a very common misconception.
Henry Selick. He obviously
Yes,
produced
he
and
just
wrote
wrote it.
Nightmare Before Christmas, yeah. But yes, so yeah, I think... sorry, I've completely lost what I was about to say. I was going to say something. Oh, yes. Yeah, I think what this movie is kind of riffing on, though, is very typical Burton kind of territory. It's very much throwing back to like the 50s and 60s B movies, but doing it in a very kind of Gen X ironic sort of way. That's something I kind of want to zero in on with this movie. Is like it has this very early Burton kind of Gen X ironic detachment to it, I think. And I actually kind of think I'm not one of these people who gets too into the whole I'm a millennial, I'm a this, I'm a that, I'm Generation Bussy. But I do think every generation has its filmmakers or its artists that kind of resonate with the time. And I definitely think Tim Burton has a very Gen X sensibility about him, that kind of slightly snarky, slightly ironic. But ultimately there is always sincerity to his stuff. Less so these days where he just makes CGI goop. But, you know, in his earlier work, you know, you think of a Beetlejuice or something like that, or Mars Attacks, as we say. But yeah, I think a lot of the imagery is obviously cribbed from the fact that this is based on a trading card game from the 60s.
Yeah, which I wasn't familiar with. And just prior to us recording this, I looked up the trading cards. They are fucking gruesome, to say the least. Like, for cards that were made in the 60s, there's some really genuinely shocking images on those cards.
Yeah, it is. Like, for example, the opening scene of this movie, where you have the cows running through the field on fire, that is one of the trading cards.
I had forgotten about that completely. So I booted this film up last night, and within a minute and a half, there is a herd of cows on fire running past. And I was like, what the fuck is happening? Like, I don't remember this one bit.
And it barely plays into the movie as well. So
yeah.
So the thing to say about this, so the trading cards were created by a company called Topps. And they were put out in the 1960s as basically, you know, collector's items. And this was at a time before things like the Comics Code, although the Comics Code maybe had taken hold by then. But basically this was at a time when people were less concerned with safeguarding the young against the evils of pop culture, right? And it fucking shows when you look at these stuff. I mean, I encourage the listeners to seek out the imagery that we're talking about because, well, when they were first released, they were eventually complained about so much that Topps discontinued and recalled the product. Nowadays, they're obviously a bit more of a collector's item, so you can find them because they do reprints every now and then. So the thing about this that's interesting as well is... So the thing to note about this as well is that it's kind of an odd choice because this came out at a time before studios just ruthlessly mined IP to create any kind of film. You know, this is at a time when nobody would make a battleship movie, for example. You remember that? That exists. So the idea of like adapting a trading card game, let alone one that was notoriously recalled, was kind of an odd choice. But I was interested to learn in my research that Tim Burton, this was brought to him. So there were other directors who were interested in adapting Mars Attacks for some strange reason. Most notably among them was Alex Cox, who you may know from Repo Man and other and Sid and Nancy and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Very subversive filmmaker at the time, and also kind of essential in introducing a lot of B movies to a British audience as well. That's another story for another day. But he was really into this, and his version of this movie just never quite came to fruition. And it kind of changed hands. There was talk of Joe Dante, which kind of makes sense.
Yeah,
there
I
was
see
talks
that.
of gremlins, little fuckers running around. It makes sense. I think Roland Emmerich was in talks at one point, which is interesting, of course. We'll come back to that.
Considering, the movie, this is very much the antithesis to,
Yeah. Eventually it comes around to Tim Burton. And the reason it comes around to Tim Burton is he wanted to adapt a different trading card game from Topps. This was called Dinosaurs Attack. Now, Burton was chasing after this property for some time. He really wanted to make a big B-movie sci-fi, like big budget throwback to kind of dinosaur rampage movies of the 50s and 60s, right? And he wanted to do all stop motion because that's his thing, right? He wants to have this vintage look to it. Or at least the dinosaurs would be stop motion. I imagine the tone of that movie would be fairly similar to this one, kind of like a cheeky throwback, a bit of a satire, that kind of thing. Now, I want you to just think for a moment, Mark, why in the 90s, the early 90s, when Tim Burton was trying to get Dinosaurs Attack off the ground, what might have come along that put the kibosh on a cheesy throwback to stop-motion dinosaurs? What do you think in the early 90s might have killed that idea off?
Could it be Jurassic Park by chance?
It was a little bit Jurassic Park, yes. And Burton himself was even like, yeah, there is no point in pursuing this anymore because they've just done the dinosaur movie. So
yeah, they've taken the dinosaur genre and just crushed it.
So that was out the door. But Topps really wanted to get him in on one of the properties because they just felt that he was right for what they wanted to do with it, kind of thing. And there was this script knocking about as well. Interesting, the script written by a guy called Consults Notes.
I've got it here, actually, written by Jonathon Gems.
Excellent, yes, thank you. Jonathon Gems, yeah. So the script had, because his idea for the script was basically like, we're going to take the iconography of the trading card game and we're going to turn it into this kind of big throwback to like old school disaster movies. So it's, ensemble cast, tons of stars, we're going between all these different people reacting to what's going on. And that's very much in the DNA of the movie as it exists now. His original script apparently had about 90 characters. And
oh, wow, okay. And this movie has a shit ton of them still, so...
Yeah, and Warner Bros. Were like, absolutely not, you need to pare this down. But interestingly, Warner Bros. Were quite hot on making this movie. Something about it really, really fired up the execs. I think it's at this point we should mention that they were apparently unaware of Independence Day being made, which probably would have made them think twice. But they kind of were thinking, the time is right. The time is ripe for a throwback to these alien invasion movies, and it can be cheeky and fun, and we're kind of taking the piss a little bit. And unfortunately for them, that summer was dominated by an entirely sincere throwback to that genre, which appeals to the mass audience, which is of course Roland Emmerich's Independence Day, a far inferior film in my opinion. But,
absolutely, 100%. I'll be honest, I really don't like Independence Day. I think it takes itself way too seriously.
Yeah, it's not a great movie.
Apart from that bit where the dog jumps away from the explosion, that's kind of genius. I feel like that should have been in this movie.
But yeah, that movie's entirely sincere and came out in the summer of that year, which is when Mars Attacks was supposed to come out, but was then pushed back to a December release date, which is just a terrible time for a movie like this. Like, why would you set this up?
100%.
Why would you set this up as a Christmas blockbuster? I can't see the logic.
I mean, Tim Burton is known for making Christmas movies that are just upsetting to general audiences, I guess.
So, yeah, that's kind of the context for this coming out. And by the time it came out, people seemed to sort of, like, just looking at some of the contemporary reviews, it was quite panned. And it seemed to be the general feeling that this movie was like a parody of Independence Day, despite the fact the two movies were obviously developed independently. So, yeah, it's an interesting context for it to come out in. Now I feel like it has a bit of a cult status, because like you say, I think people who even don't like Tim Burton, they like this movie. Or there's something about it that's kind of... it has a broader appeal now than perhaps it did then.
I can't say I know anybody that doesn't like this movie, or at least has any kind of real ill will to it. I mean, whenever I speak to people about Mars Attacks, the consensus is either I loved that film as a kid, or that film scared the living fuck out of me as a kid. That's one of the things that I hear quite a lot, because there is some real fucked up stuff in this film.
Yeah, there's some wacky and wild shit. But yeah, so that's kind of the spiel on the preamble to Mars Attacks being released. So I guess we should kind of engage with the content of this movie. And frankly, where to start? I mean...
yeah, because, I mean, you've kind of already summarised the plot, really. Like, a bunch of Martians come into contact with Earth and run amok, because that's all there really is to the plot of the movie. We have a whole load of characters who are very sort of broad strokes of characters. We don't get a whole lot of time with each of them, but I think this movie does actually do a really good job of just establishing who these characters are, what their motivation is at the point of invasion, and it does a pretty good job of rounding off their very small arcs, for the most part, I think.
Yeah.
Because, like you said, everybody is in this movie. Literally everybody.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've got a repeat offender for Kino. We've got a couple of repeat offenders, because we've got Pam Grier in there.
Yep.
we've got Lucas Haas, him of the Pussy Posse, in there. And presumably this was during his tenure in the Pussy Posse.
I remembered him having a much bigger role in this movie than he actually does. So when I was watching it for this, I was like, God, he's in this movie for a grand total of like 7 minutes.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the thing, isn't it? A lot of the actors in this are not... Like, I remember Pierce Brosnan being in this more. And he's kind of not, really. He plays... I mean, he's great in this movie. He plays the
He's so good.
Science advisor to the president. And he's totally... I mean, I think... One thing I will say about the cast, and maybe we'll go through them because that's kind of how we can... Because we should say, this movie doesn't have a lot of plot. It is literally... There's kind of 20 minutes of build-up to the Martians arriving, and then there's just carnage after that.
And it just doesn't stop as well. That's the thing. It's constant.
Yeah, and you're kind of jumping from characters to characters like it's a fucking Altman film. And they're just kind of getting into their various scrapes, kind of interacting with the Martians. A lot of it is obviously Jack Nicholson playing the president, responding
as well as playing another character.
Yes, which is something I wanted to flag up. Now, this movie is obviously cribbing a little from Doctor Strangelove. I mean, you can see the influence in the war room scenes is very much modelled after the war room in Strangelove, and obviously there is this kind of element of all these politicians just yelling and screaming at each other and just kind of being incompetent idiots, right? There is also the element of Jack Nicholson playing two roles, which obviously I think is kind of a bit of a throwback to Peter Sellers and Strangelove playing 3 roles. Yep. Interestingly, Burton gave Nicholson the script, and none of the parts were written for him, but he just kind of said, like, what role would you like to play? And Nicholson picked about 5 characters. And just said, I want to play all of these. Presumably because he would have got a much bigger check.
This is it, isn't it? I bet he was
would
like,
have got
Tim
some
Burton's on the phone.
cheeky backhander, yeah.
Wonder how much money I can make off toys this time.
Not, arguably, luckily, but maybe not for Jack. The studio had learned their lesson from Batman. And they went, Nicholson's come with his cap in his hand. Don't buy a word of it. So, aside from the president, Jack Nicholson also plays sleazy Las Vegas casino owner, who is trying his best to profit off the Martian invasion, and doing a pretty bad job of it. Now, I had in my head that it was eventually revealed that these two are brothers, but that is simply not the case. They are just both... Yeah, for some reason I remembered... I've not seen this movie for a long time. For some reason I remembered there being a reveal that was like the president's brother, and that was the whole joke, right? But like... No, it's just two Jack Nicholsons.
No, it's two very different people, just happened to both be played by Jack Nicholson, who was trying to bleed Warner Brothers dry. That's what that was.
Yeah. We've got Jack Nicholson. I mean, he gets a lot of screen time, mostly as the president, and the president character is an interesting one. He's kind of a pushover, really, right? Like he's always being pushed from one person to the next, and he won't take the nuclear option. He won't just outright attack the Martians. He's always kind of being buffeted along by other people, and also desperate for the nation's approval. I think is the main thing.
Yes, because he does get one of the best lines in the entire movie is I want the people to know that 2/3 of the government are still working for them, and that ain't bad.
Yeah, after the Martians destroy Congress. Yeah.
Which is one of the best fucking scenes in the movie, where they destroy Congress and it cuts to Lucas Haas's grandmother laughing hysterically because they just destroyed Congress.
Okay, let's take a moment to set up the various groups of characters so that we can just kind of freely discuss them. So, in terms of the president's entourage, we have his wife,
played by Glenn Close.
By Glenn Close, of course. Yeah, sorry, I don't know why I just suddenly froze then. We have his daughter, played by a young Natalie Portman, who isn't a major character, but is kind of always in the background, kind of sarcastically responding to whatever's going on. I do like the moment where there's a bunch of generals and stuff just arguing in the corridor about, should we approach the Martians peacefully? Should we attack them? And she just comes out of her room to say, guys, some people live here. I always like that little moment. We're jumping around the map here, but we're just assuming people have seen Mars Attacks, I guess. I do like at the end when, the president's dead, the first lady's dead, basically the entire government's been wiped out, and there is only the president's daughter left to give the Medal of Honor to Lucas Haas and his grandmother. It's a funny scene. So that's kind of his family. And then we've got these generals around him. We've got the one guy who, of course, is constantly demanding that we nuke the Martians to Kingdom Come.
Yes, General Decker, played by Rod Steiger?
Yeah. He turns up in a few movies, always playing that role, basically.
Yeah.
Grizzle's
general character.
But in this, he is kind of self-parodying a bit, and he's really hamming it up. Like, there's actors in this who know what movie they're in, and that guy knows what fucking movie he's in. He's like foaming at the mouth at various points. One of my favourite bits of his performance is when it becomes apparent to everyone, if the penny finally drops that the Martians, there is no cultural misunderstanding. The Martians are here to wreck our shit. Where he's going, oh, Mr. President, it's okay, Mr. President, we all make mistakes. And he's like handing him this dossier about the nuclear option, and he looks like a giddy little schoolboy. That scene is hilarious. The fact that he's so happy that it turns out that they're just destructive beasts. But yeah, so that's kind of... there's a few other characters that we'll probably get into around the presidential area. Because we've also got Martin Short.
As the presidential advisor, isn't he?
Yeah, I think he's kind of like he's an advisor, and he kind of does press conferences and stuff, and has an eye for prostitutes, as we learn.
Yes, ultimately his downfall, really.
Also, can we discuss that Martin Short is kind of weirdly cosplaying who was I going to say? Seth Green.
Oh my god, yeah, you're right. That's
he kind of he's got Seth Green's hair in this movie. It's very strange. He's also a repeat offender. He was Ben in Treasure Planet.
He was, yes.
Just saying.
Just stacking those up. Yes, that's like the presidential characters. You then also got Lucas Haas and his grandmother, and
the kind of trailer park characters, yeah,
who are great. I think they're really funny. Who kind of just represent the folk of the land, I suppose, because they even go so far as to, when the aliens are coming to invade, they just get their shotguns out, and Lucas Haas's mother's response is, well, they ain't gonna take the TV, which is one of my favourite gags.
And of course, Lucas Haas's brother, played by young Jack Black.
Yes.
A military grunt.
Almost immediately killed.
Yes.
It doesn't last particularly long, but I think like those characters, I actually quite like the little arc there where they're all really proud of Jack Black's character because he's in the military and he's going to serve his country and he's going to do his, do the family proud, and then he just dies, and ultimately because he ran in getting gun ho.
Yeah, and they all dismiss Lucas Haas, and ultimately he and Grandma are the ones who saved the world.
Inadvertently.
Inadvertently, admittedly, but
like, it's not a well thought out plan, but they just happen to find out what kills the Martians, which is still, I think, one of the things about this movie that's so well remembered is the entire finale scene where the aliens are just having their heads explode, set to really, really irritating country music.
Yeah, and of course, so the other character that we've referenced a little bit is Grandma.
Yep.
Who is possibly in the throes of Alzheimer's, or is just fucking with everyone, or a little bit of both.
Yeah.
A little bit of both. Because she constantly says the wrong name for both kids, right?
Yeah, that's very true.
But then there's a point where she says, like, she's talking to Lucas Haas's character, apparently oblivious that she's talking to him, but then says, like, he's the one that I've always liked the best. And it's like a nice little moment. So I always get the sense that Grandma's not as batty as she lets on.
No, I think she's definitely playing it up. But yeah, she's played by Sylvia Sidney. It was her last film. In the nicest possible way, you can kind of tell. Like, she very much looks towards the end of life, as it were, in this film.
Yes.
But she is also Tim Burton alumni, because she's most famously in his work. She's in Beetlejuice. She plays Juno, the caseworker with the slit throat.
Yeah, and she's great in this as well.
Yeah, she's very, very funny in this.
Yeah, so that's kind of the trailer park characters. On the other side of things, we've got the... Because most of this movie, we should say, takes place in Nevada. Although, obviously, we take a few pit stops to other places. The Taj Mahal at one point. But yeah, so we go to Las Vegas, where we have, obviously, a casino owner, Jack Nicholson.
Yep.
We
His
have...
wife, played by Annette Bening.
yes, his kind of hippie dippy wife. Who,
he's just sort of all over the place and hoping that the Martians are going to be peaceful, and she's, chanting for them. And stuff.
She turns up to the first meeting with the Martians with her crystals and shit. Although we do learn, in a typically kind of darkly comic moment, we do learn that she is a recovering alcoholic.
That is true, yes.
So she's not just a hippy dippy. She's got some troubles, this woman.
Yeah. But then this is where you get the weirdest set of characters, I think, because this is where we're introduced to Pam Grier as well, kind of as an offshoot, because her husband, who is played by... It's Jim Brown who plays him.
Jim Brown,
Byron Williams. He's Pam Grier's husband, he's an ex-wrestler, if I'm not mistaken.
He's also her ex-husband. Is the element. Because they say early on, because he says, I've got to send money back to my wife and kids, and he goes, I thought you were divorced. And,
I must have missed that detail.
So they're divorced, but they've clearly kind of got back together or something.
Or like they're going to try again. And
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's working at the casino, and he's earning money, which he's going to send back to Pam Grier. Pam Grier has 2 sons who essentially like to just bunk off school and go play shooting games in the arcade. And this is something that really stood out to me in this film. Is this film advocating for children to just skive off school and play video games all day because it will make them useful in the event of a Martian attack? Because that's kind of what this film's saying.
Absolutely, yes.
Like, they saved the president because they just don't go to school and they shoot things all day. And as soon as, they get attacked at the White House, because apparently their class is having a tour of the White House at the same time as a Martian invasion. They never really explain that. Yeah. That just kind of happens. Yeah. They just pick up guns and just start, capping Martians left, right, and centre.
Although that does lead to one of the funniest jokes, or one of the funniest kind of tossed out jokes in this movie, where they say, where the president's being evacuated from the White House and his bodyguard goes, we've got to go, Mr. It's a full-scale invasion. And he tries to go one way, he goes, you can't go that way, there's a tour.
Yeah, I like that. That feels like something out of, Airplane or something like that.
So we should say Pam Grier is she's a bus driver.
Yep.
And sorry, I'm blanking on the bloke's name. Her husband. Edit this out.
Jim Brown, Byron. That's his name.
Yeah, sorry, Jim Brown. And it's Jim Brown's ex-wife, but current lover. Don't worry about it. She's kind of cast against type in this movie, considering that the last movie we saw, she was very much cast for type.
She's playing, but Pam Grier is just playing Pam Grier and Jackie Brown.
Yeah. Whereas in this, she's kind of playing a beleaguered mother. I think is the best way to put it. Trying to raise her errant young'uns. Again, she doesn't have a lot to do in this, but she's fun to watch as always.
Pam Grier is always great on screen. She elevates anything she's in. Even Ghosts of Mars, she manages to elevate that a little bit.
Yeah, I'll steady on.
I don't know. Well, that's a story for another time. If we're talking about no, we won't go there. We won't go there. We simply won't go there.
We simply won't. Yes. Also, we cannot forget that we have Danny DeVito in the Vegas crowd,
who is on so much cocaine in this movie. I swear to God.
He is buck wild in this movie. Also, I just want to note that his character is credited as Rude Gambler. And you know what? He lives that dream. He is the rude gambler. He's always mugging everybody off. He's always looking for a drink. He's always yelling about shit. He's a rude gambler.
Can't forget the most important character in the Vegas sections, though.
Yes, I was building to this. I was saving the best for last.
Mr. Tom Jones is in this.
The Welsh Elvis himself.
What I also didn't realise until I watched it this time as well is that during the end credits, it doesn't say Tom Jones as himself. It says that Tom Jones is playing Tom Jones, which I think is really fun.
And I think he's genuinely hilarious in this as well.
Oh yeah, he's very, very good. He knows what's going on. I mean, he's not the best actor in the world, but he fits the tone. And the scene at the end where all the Vegas crew escape, and it's just Tom Jones. Tom Jones just surrounded by animals with an eagle on his arm, and he just starts grooving. It's the weirdest fucking sight. I love it so much.
Also, it led to me doing one of my famous homoerotic improvised lyrics, which goes like this. It's not unusual to be shagged up the ass.
Thank you for that.
It's all right. You know how I like to do that.
Yes, this is true. You do like to shag up the ass. Anyway.
No, well, steady on. But you know how I like to twist some lyrics is what I was getting at. Who can forget? My dick is a roller coaster. You've just gotta ride it.
A work colleague of mine he has the same knack for that you do, and he's ruined Dare by the Gorillaz for me to the point where I can't now hear that song without thinking the opening lyrics are "You've got some Pritt stick on you." Ruined it for me. Ruined.
So yeah, Tom Jones very much in this movie. Only in the movie to fly a plane.
Yeah, because apparently that's something he can do.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. Yeah, he's great. He's not the world's best actor, but it's nice to see the Welsh Elvis up to his old tricks.
Yeah, it's just fun to have him in it, and he shows up.
Something really sent me about the bit where, because obviously he's still performing, and then the Martians kind of crash in. Something really made me laugh about the way he just goes, "Come on, girls," and like leads the showgirls out of the way.
It's like there's no real sense of urgency in his performance, which I think is great.
No,
he's just kind of coasting the entire film.
Just take a detour for a minute. What's your thoughts on Tom Jones?
I mean, I respect the guy. I can't say there's a lot of his music that I'm particularly fanatical about, but I respect the dude. He's been singing for how many years now?
Yeah, I mean, he looks like an old leather armchair these days.
He does. One that's not been dusted for a while.
He's still going. I mean, how old is he? He's like 106.
I mean, let's find out. Mr. Tom Jones, how old are you, mate?
Because he's in his early 90s.
82.
Fucking hell.
And I bet he's still fucked as well. He looks like he does.
Look, he looks like not only does he fuck, he's into some swinger shit.
Oh, absolutely. Like, he probably invented car key swapping parties.
The legal advice bearer isn't here to tell us not to say these things. But also, I feel like that's not even libel when it comes to Tom Jones. Like, that man has had more sex in his life than you or I will ever have.
Like, he's probably had more sex than we've had hot dinners, mate.
He's had more sex than he's had hot dinners.
That is his hot dinners. Tom Jones doesn't eat food; he just eats puss. That's all it is.
Jesus Christ! I was trying to master a Tom Jones impression for this episode, but I can't crack it. It just comes out as Sean Connery. I can't do the Welsh accent, unfortunately.
No, I don't think I could. I mean, the closest I was going to do to an impression on this episode was the UFO sound, because I can do that, but I don't think I can do it on command.
Oh, okay.
Shall I try
Let's give you a build-up. In 5 seconds, Mark is going to perform the UFO sound from Mars Attacks, while Tom Jones watches. Hello, it's me, Tom Jones.
Sean Connery, when did you get hit?
Inexplicably played by Sean Connery.
Right, I'll try and do my sound. I have to really think about it to do it. It really throws me. Hey, I did it.
I have no idea if that picked up on the mic, but hopefully it did.
Oh, I definitely did. I'm looking at the waveform. It picked up. If not, I will re-record it and slip it in post. Because that's what professionals do.
Okay, so I think that's most of the characters covered. Oh no, wait, sorry, we've totally skipped over. So we've got Pierce Brosnan, who is the science advisor to the president, and he gets on the chirps with Sarah Jessica Parker, also a repeat offender to this podcast. Because at the start, Sarah Jessica Parker is going out with Michael J. Fox, who I was startled to see only lasts for about 20 minutes in this movie.
Yeah, he gets killed really early doors, doesn't he?
He gets iced early on. But yes, they're both playing, it's kind of, he's a news reporter, and she's kind of a chat show host.
Yeah, kind of trashy talk show host, yeah.
It seems their relationship is on the rocks. Well, it definitely is, because when Brosnan shows up, he's on the chirps and she's into it.
Oh yeah, she's like, give me that James Bond who needs Mike McFly energy. That's,
Yeah.
She's all about Brosnan. He's all about her as well. Like, they're instantly just horny for each other.
And this is the part of the movie that was seared into my brain from youth. Brosnan and SJP get abducted by the Martians, and she has her head swapped with her pet Chihuahua, which is a terrifying sight. And he's just like a severed head for the rest of the movie that's kept alive through alien technology. But they still manage to have a brief romance aboard the Martian's ship, which is hilarious.
It's my favourite stuff in the film.
Yeah, I think these two are really funny in this. Like, she's playing it kind of very like, oh, you noticed me, kind of stuff, and like
whilst like scratching behind her ears with her tongue.
Yeah. And Brosnan fucking owns it, man. Like, he's so funny in this. Like the fact that before he gets his head severed, he's just perpetually smoking a pipe, and he has this constant refrain about, oh, the Martians must be peaceful because they're so much more advanced than us. He delivers my favourite line in the movie when they're autopsying a dead Martian. What concerns me most is the lack of genitals.
He's on it, mate. Like, he's just constantly horn dogging in this movie.
Yeah, I mean, and we should also point out this is 96, so this is Brosnan immediately after GoldenEye, his first Bond movie. So it's kind of wild that he's in this doing such a blatant self-parody. Like, I mean, it's hilarious, and like he's absolutely fucking great, and it's a shame. I kind of wanted him to do more in the movie, but yeah, it's crazy that like they would never let Daniel Craig do this shit, would they?
Especially not immediately. Like, he's currently playing Foghorn Leghorn in Rian Johnson's new murder mystery movie.
Yeah. But imagine that immediately after Casino Royale, though, is what I'm saying.
No, yeah, that's very true. That's very true. I have to say, like, about this whole like Brosnan and SJP bit. This is my favourite stuff in the movie because it's so fucking absurd, and it just kind of really hammers home what we were talking about when we talked about Batman Returns, in that, you know, I can't think of another director in history who has slipped so much surreal and just truly bizarre shit into major Hollywood blockbusters. Because, you know, Batman Returns is just kinky and weird and lurid. This movie has one of the best scenes in all of cinema, where Pierce Brosnan's severed head falls to the floor. SJP's severed head detaches from the Chihuahua body, which is still sentient, may I point out. It still moves after her head comes loose. And the two of their heads are just rolling around on the floor of the Martian ship. And they have this really tender, romantic kiss as the Martian ship crashes into the water and is submerged, and they both just drown.
Yeah. It's great.
How did this not win Best Picture, is what I want to know.
It was robbed, mate. It was robbed. But with that, we should probably discuss a little bit the real stars of this movie. I mean, you've got all the stars of Tinseltown, as we've just discussed, but the real stars of this movie, the alien menace themselves, those cheeky little Martians. What do you make of them?
That are always running around in the nud.
Yes.
Is a bit weird.
Yeah, well, they also have those weird, like, Wallace and Gromit, like, things that just go to get, like, they step into it and just smacks a costume onto them. What I love about the Martians in this, I mean, the design is incredible, obviously, the big brain heads and the bulging eyes and everything.
Yeah, it's a really iconic image, I think. Like, nowadays when you think Martians, that's very much the idea that you think of. I think it might be just as, like, prevalent within culture as the sort of tall, thin, grey alien design that, you know, things like the X-Files really helped popularise.
And obviously the
which is it's great.
That then gets translated by the translation machine. But also, I think the thing that I love about the Martians in this movie is that they're just little shit.
Yeah.
There's no real motivation given for what they do. They're just
they're just chaotic.
They're just chaotic evil. They don't really give a fuck. They're actively sadistic in many cases. But the thing that I also like is the fact that they keep pretending to be peaceful. So when they first show up, they go and it gets translated to "We come in peace." And then as soon as they see a dove that a hippie releases, they just open fire.
That's what sets them off. Like, what is universally seen as a sign of peace on Earth, just sets them into a rage.
But then obviously the Pierce Brosnans and so forth of the world are trying to convince President Jack Nicholson that it must have been a cultural misunderstanding. So they invite the Martians to Congress, only for the exact same thing to happen. They just open fire on Congress, and then over and over again they try this same thing, and the humans keep falling for it. So there's a scene where the president of France calls Jack Nicholson and is like, "Oh, the Martians have sat down with us. They want to negotiate peace talks," only to be immediately killed, and everyone else in the room is killed. It's so funny, and the fact that they're just little shits, like the bit where the Martians' flying saucer shoots the Washington Monument, and it starts to collapse one way, and then these school kids run out of the way, and then they knocks it the other way, and then they run out of the way again. Like, they're just toying with them. It's amazing.
My one little fun fact to bring to the table here before we discuss more of the Martians being little shitheads. You mentioned the translator that comes up. So this is to throw it back to an earlier Kino episode. This is something that I didn't know about. I'm surprised I never knew about this. So the voice that comes out of the Martian translator is Roger L. Jackson, who is the voice of Ghostface in the Scream movies. Turns out
nice.
It was this role that got him the role of Ghostface.
That's fun.
Yeah, didn't know that. I was like quite impressed by that.
There's also a hilarious bit where the Martians are just running after people and shooting them with their death rays, where one of them is just speaking into the translator and it's saying, "Come back, we are your friends." Yeah, I mean, I love the Martians in this. I like it when the alien menace is presented as they are, which is just ruthless killing machines that do not deserve empathy.
And I like how the Emperor is or they say like the leader. It's just a regular Martian, just with a really fancy little cape on. I like that.
Yeah, well, there's two. There's the ambassador, quote unquote,
who wears red.
cape.
Yes.
Yeah, and then there's their leader who has the purple cape. Yeah.
Also, I mean, I feel like you must respect these Martians because they're shown to watch Godzilla at one point, so they're clearly creatures of refined taste.
Yeah, they're men of culture, and I can respect that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Also, clearly this must just be the greatest movie ever made, in your opinion, because not only does it have this star-studded cast, Godzilla is in it. So therefore, surely this must be the best movie ever, in your opinion.
Yeah, a cheeky Godzilla cameo never goes in this.
Yeah, exactly. That's why Austin Powers Goldmember is also one of the best films ever made.
Well, that, for legal reasons, does not feature Godzilla.
Yes, as they so clearly point out. That's probably the best joke in that movie. I just want to throw that out there.
I don't know. I like it when Fat Bastard looks in the toilet and goes, "What the? I didn't have any corn."
I'd forgotten about that. I think one thing that I really want to say about this as well, like, speaking about the aliens being so awful as well, and looking at the cast of this movie, major studios these days would not make anything like this anymore. This was only 96.
Certainly they would. I don't think they would do something like this that was not based on something more culturally resonant, I suppose. Like something that was more well known than like a fucking Recall trading card game.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like these days they wouldn't take a chance like that. I think back then this was kind of the perfect storm of the fact that Tim Burton was, hot shit at this point. To borrow a phrase from one of my favourite movies, he could take a shit, wrap it in tinfoil and sell it to the Queen as earrings, like he was that fucking hot shit.
And if you're playing along at home, name that movie.
Yeah, so points if you know the reference. I'm pretty sure we must have referenced it on this show before.
I'm surprised we haven't covered it on this show, to be honest. But
I'm kind of surprised we haven't as well. I think we might try and find a way of bringing it on. I'll never turn down an excuse to watch that. So,
name that movie. You will win a cuddle from Mark.
Yeah, actually, yeah. Go on then. If you can tell me what that is, I'll give you a cuddle when I see you.
No, not when you see them, Mark. You're going to go to their house and
a surprise cuddle.
Yeah, you'll turn up and cuddle them, Mark.
This is going down a very dark path. I'm not sure I like where this discussion's going.
Whatever happens, happens.
Okay, back to the Martians. No, I love their sense of humor in this. I love the fact that they take such sadistic joy in what they're doing. I think that's what makes them so endearing to me. Is that in a lot of other movies, aliens are kind of more portrayed as a little bit more thoughtful and maybe a bit more tactical. Other than that bit where one of them dresses up as a woman.
Yes, we should shout that out.
They don't really have much in the way of tactics.
I mean, that's an iconic scene from this movie. Is Lisa Marie as the...
It is, and I think that's probably the scene that most people remember in terms of the being scared of it. I think that the way that woman moves is so creepy. And watching it again for this, that actress, whoever she is...
It's Lisa Marie. Tim Burton's former partner.
Oh, I didn't know that, actually.
Yeah. Before Helena came in and home-wrecked.
Did she home-wreck, or is
She did home-wreck.
Did she?
Yeah. Whilst dressed as a sexy monkey.
Isn't it weird that she was dressed up as an ape and still managed to wreck her home?
She did the sexy monkey routine.
I think that says more about Tim than it does Helena, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, look, we don't need to get into Tim's personal life, but... He's up to no good. He's quite the pussy posse member himself, Tim Burton.
It was one of the he was always in the corner.
Just picking up the goth chicks. Anyway, we can't make the pussy posse a recurring thing on this podcast. We're already so filthy.
Yeah. We're gonna do it though, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're starting our own pussy posse. With Tim Burton, who else? Saito from Inception.
Mahendra from Mystics in Bali.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's a one-man pussy posse.
It's true. Kathy's well into him. I don't know why.
If you don't remember the movie, if you don't remember that chat, you should check out Kino, Inferno, Season 1, Episode... the one where we talk about Asian horror movies.
Yeah, go listen to it. It's good.
Yes, engagement. Leave a like or a comment.
I mean,
in fact, if you go back and listen to that, if you go back and listen to that on YouTube, or even indeed Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, where I believe you can also leave comments. If you go back and listen to it off the back of listening to this episode, I just want you to leave a comment that says Bussy Pops.
Yeah.
Bussy Pops.
Hashtag Bussy Pops.
Hashtag Bussy Pops. That's good branding. T-shirt, maybe? Where were we? Yes, Mars Attacks. We should probably wrap this up because we've kind of talked all over this movie.
I feel that's appropriate though, because this movie is it's very scattershot in execution in the sense that like it very much just goes, right, Martian invasion, boom, and then we just jump all over the shop as we just see chaos unfolding. And I think that's kind of what I like about it so much, is that it's a full-on disaster movie in the most traditional sense.
I had forgotten that it was quite a slow burn for the first 20 minutes. Like, it doesn't kick off immediately. It kind of takes a little while for the aliens to actually land and for shit to go south. There's quite a lot of build up towards it, and I appreciated that, because then the following hour and change is just carnage on an epic scale. But
yeah, I think it does a good job of actually treating its characters with a degree of respect as well. Even though the characters are kind of very broad exaggerations and archetypes and stuff, I think it gives them all just enough screen time where you actually can sort of grow to like them, because I think the hammy performances really help, especially from Pierce Brosnan and SJP. I think they're particularly good in this film as well. I mean, SJP's good with Tim Burton. That's the thing.
I think Brosnan's very zeroed in on what he needs to do for this movie, actually. He's something of a ham anyway.
Yeah, I rewatched Mrs. Doubtfire recently and kind of forgotten how hammy his performance in that film is.
But he's absolutely nailing the tone of this with his constant pipe smoking and his the Martians must be more advanced than us. And it's I think he's one of the standouts of the cast, honestly. I mean, they're all fantastic, obviously. I feel like everyone kind of knows what movie they're in. That's the thing that's kind of strange about this movie to me. They put so much money into it, Warner Brothers did, which is a weird thing anyway, because this movie would never be made on this scale today.
No,
it's the fact
70 million budget.
Yeah, exactly. And you have so many of these very, very well-established actors, some of them at the peak of their powers at this point, and they're all willing to just kind of be in this throwbacky kind of campy, they're all hamming it up. It makes me think that maybe they were onto something, and if Independence Day hadn't come out, maybe this movie would have actually struck a chord. It seems like everyone in this had a good grasp on what kind of movie they were doing.
I think as well, because so many of the cast members worked with Tim Burton previously, and they don't all get, apart from Jack Nicholson, who definitely gets the most screen time out of anybody, purely because he plays two fucking characters. I think everybody that was involved with it looked at their sort of very small parts and was like, yeah, I can do this. I don't think this movie was going to be detrimental to anyone's career in any way, shape, or form as well. It didn't really feel like anyone was really taking a risk. And I think that they all probably just jumped at the chance to not only work with Burton again, but just to be like, this is fucking ridiculous. Let's just have fun with it. And yeah, you can tell everyone's having fun with this film. And that really, that shows on screen, I think.
Yeah, and I think they do a good job of making the characters likeable, as you say, but also they're just kind of pathetic and stupid enough that when the Martians wipe them all out, you don't really care. There's no moment where you're like, oh god, the humanity. It's not that kind of movie.
Yeah, I think the only thing that we haven't really discussed, which we can sort of, briefly touch on, is a lot of people go back and forth on how satirical this movie is. I don't think it's like it's not an out-and-out satire, but I think it's definitely, making some jabs at the idea that if Martians did invade, that America is woefully unprepared to deal with the fallout, and that those in charge probably don't know what they're doing.
Well, I think there's a touch of, and I don't know if this is a movie you've seen, but a touch of Shin Godzilla to this movie.
No, I haven't seen that. It's on my list because that movie looks really interesting.
Oh yeah, it's great. We will definitely cover it on this part at some time. But that's a movie for people who haven't seen it, where they kind of rebooted Godzilla, and the whole thing was basically a parody of the kind of Japanese government's response to various environmental disasters. And I kind of think this movie has that idea running through it as well. It's much less horrific than that movie is, because that movie goes to some places. But this movie definitely has the thing where it's kind of... I don't know that it's necessarily commenting on what would happen if aliens invaded for real. I think it's just kind of being like, it's kind of poking fun at the idea of these disasters happen, these wars happen, and everyone's just using it for their own weird ends, and they're all kind of, because there's the one guy, the general who's not Mr. Newcomb, whose whole thing is like, well, I want to be the one to meet the Martian ambassador because that'll be good for my career, kind of thing. And there's all these, the president's like worrying about what the public will make of all his decisions all the way through, more so than what the decisions are themselves. And there's that kind of vibe to it, because it's also contrasted by at the end when, because you see the president make various speeches, various kind of manicured speeches to the public throughout this movie. But at the end you have Lucas Haas and his grandma. Well, first of all, they have the mariachi band playing the Star Spangled Banner, which is hilarious. And then Natalie Portman adorning them with the Medals of Honor. And you get there's a very funny scene where Lucas Haas kind of has to give a speech because he just sort of feels like he should. And his speech is terrible, which I really like. He just kind of says, like, yeah, well, I guess we need to start rebuilding our houses and stuff, although maybe we should live in teepees because I think that'd be better. And it's just like, I think that's the essence of the satire in this movie, where it's kind of contrasting like the more real people who kind of ended up stumbling on the answer to the Martian invasion, which, as it turns out, was yodeling. They cannot deal with yodeling. It makes their heads explode. Don't worry about it. Like that contrasted with, the might of the US government and military, who just cannot get it together. They're all infighting. They're all serving their own ends and agendas more so than they're attending to the literal Martian invasion that's happening. I think that's the element of the satire.
Yeah, I don't think it digs too deep. It's definitely smarter than what some people probably gave it credit for, but I think that element is there, and I think that's definitely where it mines the most humour, aside from the really grotesque, horrible stuff that happens.
Yeah, and I think obviously there's the prestige of B-movies in general, and it's kind of making fun of the notions of like there are certain character archetypes that turn up, like all of these 50s and 60s B-movies have a scientist who's like, we shouldn't do war, we should try and make peace with the creatures. So they're satirising that with the Pierce Brosnan character. And they're kind of doing that in general with a lot of the other characters as well. And so I think there is definitely a satirical edge to this movie. I don't think it's too concerned with making any particular point, but I think it is exploring that idea of like, well, how does the US, the three branches of US government, attend to these disasters and so forth? Because there are little details like they don't want the president to meet with the Martians because the Senate has to meet with them and all this kind of stuff. And that was kind of the stuff that put me in mind of Shin Godzilla a little bit, because there's a lot of stuff in that movie where they're like, oh, well, we can't discuss this issue in this room, we have to go into the other meeting room, and they will kind of shuffle into like meeting room J, and then they talk about something else, and then it's like, oh no, well, we can't discuss that here, we have to go back to the other room. and it's this idea of like being so consumed with procedure and keeping up appearances in the face of like annihilation that I think both those films have.
Well, so I think we're probably both in agreement then this is a hard Kino from both of us.
Yeah, I'd give this a stiff, quivering Kino.
A throbbing, little bit drippy Kino, yeah.
A little bit of pre-Kino dripping off the end.
Yeah, I love this movie. I've loved it for many years, and watching it again for this gave me an even bigger appreciation for it. Just so many bits in it had me full on laughing out loud. I'd forgotten how ridiculous Glenn Close's death is in this movie, where she gets crushed by the Nancy Reagan chandelier.
Yeah, chandelier to the face.
Which is just great. Yeah, no, it's a Kino from me, definitely.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. I hadn't seen this movie for a while. It was a favourite as a kid. And I've seen it a couple of times since then. But yeah, it's the kind of movie where enough time had passed that I'd forgotten quite a bit of it. So yeah, it was good to watch for the pod, and I'd have to agree it's hard Kino.
So, Mars Attacks, pure, unfiltered Kino. We love it.
I agree.
We love it.
So let's move on to part 2 of this episode, where we discuss a movie that's also a laugh riot. Your choice, Mark. Jonathon Glazer's Under the Skin.
I'll get under your skin.
You're already under my bastard skin.
Yeah, that's true. It's comfy.
So you live alone?
Yes,
You think I'm pretty?
I like her gorgeous.
Come to me.
Loosely based on the novel of the same name, Under the Skin follows a mysterious woman who journeys from town to town along the northern coast of Scotland. Armed with only her irresistible looks and a large white van, she sets about luring unsuspecting men into an otherworldly void, all in the name of some omnipresent extraterrestrial force. However, the more time this woman spends amongst her prey, the more she discovers about herself and the cruel nature of this planet. There you go.
And Scarlett Johansson gets her rat out.
She does, and I think most people are familiar with this film because of that. Like, that's kind of the only thing that everyone ever seems to really talk about. Well, outside of people like me and you who, you know, actively wank off with celluloid, I think most people just notice it's, oh, that's that film that Scarlett Jo got a rat out in.
This might be the bluest episode we've ever done.
I don't know about
If we're talking
that.
some absolute filth this episode.
I don't know, man. Do you remember the April 20th special where we just talked at length about chowing down on puss?
Yeah, I think we're all trying to forget that.
No.
Yes, Under the Skin, Mark. So Mark, this is your choice for the Alien Invaders episode, and I know that you're a big fan of this movie.
Understatement there, I think.
Yeah, you've said it's your favourite film of the 2010s?
That is correct, yes. I mean, I'm pretty confident in saying that because there are times where I do sort of second guess and think to myself, oh, maybe that film was, but 9 times out of 10, whenever I think of, because the way that my brain sometimes works, I tend to list things. Obviously, that's why I write some of the things that I do on the internet. But
he loves the list.
Yeah, I'm a listicle man, I guess. I hate that word. I fucking hate that word. Anyway, no, whenever I try and think about like films in terms of like decades, years, and stuff like that, when I think about the 2010s, the one film that always springs to my head as being my favourite of that time is Under the Skin. So I've already tipped my hat very early there in terms of what I think of this movie, but I just really wanted to like talk about it on the show because I do absolutely adore this film. Jonathon Glazer is one of my favourite directors, and I think this is arguably his best film. I think there's a lot to argue in terms of Jonathon Glazer. I think obviously Sexy Beast would be the one that a lot of people would say is his
I
best
would
movie.
go for Sexy Beast myself because I love that movie.
Yeah, and I love Sexy Beast as well, but Under the Skin really just butters my egg roll, you know?
I would say I've seen this movie, so this is the second time I've seen this. I saw this when it kind of first came out. I didn't see it at the cinema, but I saw it shortly after when it was on home release. I have to say, this is a movie that I definitely appreciate a lot. It's a movie that I'm maybe a little more tepid on than yourself. There's a lot to like about it, I'll say that. Like, Glazer's a beast, obviously, so there's no argument from me there. I think this film, well, we'll kind of get into it. So we've kind of summed up the plot there, and we should just sort of say briefly, because this is another movie where working through the plot isn't really going to help us discuss it. But we should say briefly, the vast majority of this movie is Scarlett Johansson as the woman, driving around in a murder van, picking up random men on the streets of Glasgow, taking them back to her grotty house, and then making them sink into alien space goo in a black void. It's pretty apparent that ScarJo is playing an alien in this, although, interestingly, one of our commenters on Facebook stated that he never thought this movie was about aliens until he read up on it afterwards, which I can kind of get. Like, if I didn't know that this movie was specifically dealing with, like, if it was based on a book that was explicitly about aliens, before I watched it, I might be a bit like, what's going on here? What's the metaphor? Because obviously you see her being constructed in the opening moments of the film. Like, you have her eye being put together, and then you hear her vocalizing as if she's being programmed in to speak English, kind of thing. So clearly she's some kind of synthetic, or she's the glamour that she wears as a human being is some kind of synthetic thing. And you do obviously see her true form later on. But yeah, we should say, so the plot of this movie is pretty much ScarJo as the woman, going around Glasgow, interacting with these various men, taking them back to her apartment to consume in black oil or what have you, and slowly becoming more human, as the film goes on. There is also this character, this motorcyclist, who seems to be one of her kind, is her handler in some ways. There are various points in the movies where he's checking up on her, seeing, he like stares into her eyes at one point, and seems to be kind of not necessarily controlling what she's doing, but kind of checking in on what she's doing at regular intervals.
Yeah, because it's worth noting at the very start of this movie, after we see this really kind of abstract construction of ScarJo's character, we see the motorcyclist pull over in a lay-by, go into some bushes, and retrieve a woman and take her into the back of a van, where we then see ScarJo, who is nude from the offset, because that's a big thing in this movie. She then takes the clothes off of this woman, who is seemingly dead, puts the clothes on herself, and then goes about like her mission, as it were.
Yeah. It's not entirely clear what her mission is. She just seems to be pursuing lonely men. Because, we see a lot of scenes of her, kind of, her main move seems to be pulling up to a guy who she sees alone and kind of being like, hey, I'm lost, can you help me? Hey, why don't you get in and I'll drop you off at your destination? And then inevitably that leads to the bizarre, sexy murder scenes. But and also we see that she deliberately targets people who won't be missed, basically, because we see various points where she's asking, like, she always goes through the same questions, right? Like, do you have family around here? Do you live alone? Do you have a girlfriend? And all of this kind of stuff. Obviously, as the movie goes along, this line of questioning starts to take on a new meaning. It starts to be about kind of, she starts to empathize, it seems, with her victims a little bit.
Yeah, one victim in particular, which we'll obviously come to.
Yeah. And just so that we kind of know where we are in the movie. So there's all these scenes. There's one victim that she picks up who she does empathise with a bit more. We'll discuss it in more depth later. But she basically lets him get away is the one thing. Doesn't do him any good because the motorcyclist comes along and bumps him off later on anyway. But after that point, she abandons her mission, ends up getting picked up by a guy on the bus who I definitely want to talk about because this man is making some interesting moves in his life, is all I will say about
He is. How old is he supposed to be? That was my question. Like, I've seen this movie many times, and I still can't figure out if he's, like, in his early 30s or his late 50s, judging by the way that he dresses and the fact that he, you know, what he cooks her for dinner and what they watch.
Yeah, and he, like, takes her home off the bus because he thinks she's in trouble, and he's making some weird moves, this dude. We'll get into it. But then she kind of forms a weird relationship with him where it seems like he's providing her with some intimacy that she's been missing. It almost leads to a sex scene, which doesn't quite happen. She then abandons him and roams around the Scottish wilderness for a bit. Is almost sexually assaulted by some random dude. He finds out that she's an alien, burns her alive. End of movie. So... Yeah. that's the broad strokes. We'll kind of
Yeah,
get into
that's the
specifics more.
story, as it were. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is a movie that the dialogue is not really advancing the plot ever, or it is in some instances, but it's more about the character interactions and the kind of implications of each scene and the kind of the atmosphere and everything. Like the plot is not really the focus, I think it's fair to say.
No, it's, you just sort of watch this character's journey, as it were. And I think this thing, like, a lot of people talk about this movie in the sense of saying that it's hard to follow, or it's confusing, or they're not quite sure what's going on in it. And I think it's because, like you say, the dialogue isn't really there to sort of push the story forward. The story is told very visually. And often, the viewer really does have to kind of fill in blanks and just, like, infer what is going on in the scene. And a lot of the time, ScarJo is just kind of looking haunted from most of it. And you kind of have to really kind of read her emotions off of her. And I think her performance in this is absolutely outstanding. This is the best she's been in any film ever, in my opinion. Considering she doesn't speak a lot.
Yeah, it's definitely... I don't know if I'd say it's the best she's ever been. She's going to be a repeat offender this season. I've got things to say about her in a certain other film we're going to cover. But this is definitely up there, I think, with one of her kind of... this is a movie that reminds you that Scarlett Johansson is a real actor,
Yeah.
Like, it's not, because she was an indie darling before she was ever Black Widow, right? And
yeah, exactly. Because, Black Widow pays the bills, real acting doesn't,
ScarJo's got the skills still.
Yeah, and it's amazing what she does in this movie with so little in terms of dialogue. She conveys everything through expression and body language, and it's honestly brilliant to see her doing this kind of stuff.
And it is a performance as well where she melts into the aesthetic. Like, after a while, you kind of forget that you're watching a very famous Hollywood actress in this role. I think that's fair to say. I mean, first of all, her English accent, because she's kind of English, but everyone else is Scottish, like it's set in Glasgow. Presumably she couldn't do the Glaswegian accent, so they just plumped for British, English, I should say. But her English accent's pretty on point, I thought, which was something.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you mentioned during the very abstract creation scene at the beginning, you hear the voice. That's actual audio of her practicing her British accent.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, there's actual takes of it. Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that in this movie. They kind of, her performance is layered throughout it in several different ways. Because the main thing about this movie that a lot of people tend to talk about is those opening sort of scenes where she's driving around Glasgow and she's picking men up. A lot of those scenes were real.
Yeah, she's interacting with real people on the streets.
Yeah, it's all hidden cameras.
There's even one where they don't show the guy she's talking to, they just show her. Which is presumably because he didn't sign a release form to be in the movie. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of an interesting way to shoot that scene anyway, so it works. But there's definitely a naturalism to this film, which makes the more surreal aspects kind of stand out even more, I think. Like, there's this interesting contrast between... Because there's a lot of shots in this movie that are just like stock footage of, presumably not extras, just people going about their business.
Yeah.
On the streets of Glasgow. And it kind of, the whole thing lends this kind of surrealism to it where, like, obviously you have Scarlett Johansson, who you can't escape, is a very famous actress. But then there's this intense kind of conjuring of, like, this very sort of mundane setting of this kind of, like, day-to-day life, just people going to shops, people going about their lives, essentially. Meanwhile, there's this very heightened alien surrealism kind of coming in. I think that's the thing that strikes me most about this movie when on the two occasions that I've watched it, is like the contrast between those two things is very stark and interesting.
Yeah, I've always said that I always find this film to be very, very mesmerizing. I think it has a very potent, very unique atmosphere that I've seen this film quite a few times, and I always find it really... I'm always really drawn into it, is kind of what I wanted to say. I mean, admittedly, the first time I saw this movie, I had a few light refreshments, and was basically just hypnotized for, an hour and 40. Yeah. Like, completely hooked into it, and it left such an impression on me. Like, it genuinely haunted me for a while, this film. And I didn't watch it again for about a year or two. And then I did watch it again, and I had the exact same experience with it again. And then, again, left it a little while, watched it again. And every single time I've seen it, it just completely sucks me in. And I can't think of many other films that really do that for me. I still find this film disturbing every time I see it.
I can't think of any
That's
film
the
that I
other
would
thing.
necessarily compare this to. Like, that's the thing that I think is quite striking, but also makes it kind of hard to discuss in this context. Is like, this doesn't feel like anything else that I've seen anyway. Obviously, there's kind of shades of your Lynches and so forth, and the surreal aspects and all that kind of thing. But like, it feels genuinely. I mean, we talk too much about like originality, right? But like, it feels genuinely like something that just came out of Jonathon Glazer's brain, fully formed.
Yeah, even though
it's
you
very
can
experiential
see the
in that
influences.
way. Yeah, for sure. But like, again, it doesn't feel like a film that's beholden to influences. It doesn't feel like it's trying to evoke the mood of anything else. I mean, we've talked about Mars Attacks, right? It's trying to evoke the mood of 1960s, 1950s B-movie thrillers, right? But this movie doesn't feel like it's evoking anything else. It's just kind of existing as it is.
Like, you can see the reference points in a way. Like, you can see it in, like,
But what would you say the reference points are? Nicholas Roeg, yeah, sure.
Nicholas Roeg, so, like, Man Who Fell to Earth is definitely a big one. 2001, you can definitely see shades of that in there as well.
Yeah, certainly in the kind of the more abstract scenes, yeah.
Yeah, I think, like, it's, again, like you say, it's not beholden to those influences, but you can definitely see where it's kind of mining some of its ideas from.
You can say 2001, but it doesn't have the like fussiness of Kubrick. It's very very stark and very what's the word I'm looking for? Minimalist doesn't feel like quite the right word, but it's very like the naturalism of it is very striking.
Yeah, especially when they do contrast it with the more out there stuff that happens in this movie. I think that's kind of what really gets under my skin about this movie is
podcast
compared
over.
No, compared to Mars Attacks, which is just this really overblown, campy kind of affair. This is a much more subtle kind of alien invasion movie, and I think what gets me about it is that like you say, there's that sort of almost like documentary level footage of people just going about their lives whilst ScarJo is like walking around amongst them doing her thing. It's unsettling in the sense that, it feels very real. It feels like, you could walk past this person, this whole stuff could be happening, and this stuff, may happen and you will never know about it, and that's kind of what gets me about it. Mars Attacks is very deliberately in your face and brash, whereas this is much more subtle and
I think
foreboding.
one film that I would compare this to, actually, which again, stay tuned, listeners, is Titane. Actually, I think that has a very similar feeling to that. I mean, that film is much more gonzo and over the top, right? But the sense of like, I wouldn't be surprised if Julia Dacre now, he said, attempting it without reading it, is I wouldn't be surprised if she didn't cite this as if she cited this as an influence, because it definitely has that aspect of well, first of all, both of them have these very like predatory female characters in the lead roles, but characters who start off as entertain a serial killer in this, an alien who's abducting these men and doing God knows what to them. But then as the film goes on, there's this sense of like they develop almost this empathy for people, or not necessarily for people, but like they have this sense of humanity that kind of dawns on them almost in both movies. I mean, we'll get into Titane another time because we are going to cover it this season, but that's the thing that I think is interesting about the Scarlett Johansson performance in this, is it starts off very... They do a lot of stuff where they're contrasting her talking to the guys, where she's being very charming and flirty and seductive, and that's typical ScarJo stuff. And then as soon as she's not talking to them, the face just drops, and it's this cold, emotionless being.
And she does that so well as well. Like it's very sort of predatory, which is I think what's so like interesting about it.
But then as the film goes on, you see this kind of crack in her where she becomes more haunted by what she's doing. And we'll get into the reasons why in a minute. But one thing that I think I do want to kind of talk about with this movie, I mean, Glazer says that he didn't want this to be a movie about gender, but I think inevitably it kind of is. Yeah. Because this is a movie where you're deliberately reversing the kind of what we think of as the typical predatory dynamic between like men and women, and you're turning it on its head because you have this woman who's preying on vulnerable men. Obviously, she's not a human woman, but by all appearances she is. And you have this idea of like, as I was watching it, one thing that I was thinking about was like, no woman would ever get in that van. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Whereas like men see attractive woman in driver's seat, they're like, "Fuck yeah, I'm in," and ultimately that's why she's successful.
And you get the sense that a lot of them are just kind of like, well, if there's an opportunity, there's an opportunity, you know. And I think that's what makes it easy for the character to kill them or use them for experiments or for whatever's going on in that fucking oil pit room.
That we definitely need to talk about.
But yeah, so we should talk about the character of, he's just credited as the deformed man, but I hope you've got the actor's name written down.
Yeah, the character who's played by Adam Pearson, who weirdly is a friend of a friend of a friend of mine.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
okay.
In a very sort of roundabout way. Essentially, a friend of mine worked with a guy who, here in Lincoln, was involved with the sort of TED Talks that happen here. It's like TEDx, I think it's called. And Adam Pearson has come and done a few of them, so this person that I know knows him quite well. Yeah, one of those odd little things. I've never met him personally, but I know people in my sort of circle who have met him. He does a lot of talks about, bullying and, outward appearance and stuff like that.
Yeah, so we should say he has facial disfigurement of some kind.
It's neurofibromatosis is the name for it. And it's just essentially it's a collection of tumours upon the face. Well, in his case, they're on his face. It materializes in different ways in different people.
Yeah, and it's completely like the actor has this condition. Is if you watch this movie, it's not makeup or anything like that. That is him. Also, interestingly, I know that Adam Pearson really wants to play a Bond villain. I say let him. Yeah, but he's excellent in this film, and so this is the kind of the reason I wanted to bring this character up is that it starts to kind of lean into what I was saying, where he's the victim who ends up not being a victim. She lets him go. But this is the turning point, right? Because she kind of because she picks him up as he's on his way to Tesco's. And she kind of talks to him. She goes through her usual questions about, do you have a girlfriend, all this kind of stuff. And obviously he's kind of saying no. And she asks him, like, why do you shop at 9? He says, people are ignorant towards me. And then this scene kind of develops in this way where she's using her usual coaxing methods, but with him, it becomes genuine. And there's this thing where it becomes clear that she wants to comfort him in a way that she didn't with the other ones, right? And I think it's a brilliantly acted scene, but by both of them, by the way.
Oh yeah, for sure.
He seems acutely aware of this being a weird situation. Like when she's like, do you want to touch my face and all the rest of it. Like, he seems acutely aware this is a strange situation to be in. But at the same time, it's like, this person who obviously he doesn't know the reason why she wouldn't be discriminatory towards him is that she's not human. She doesn't necessarily understand that, like, well, she doesn't necessarily have our beauty standards and all this kind of stuff. She just kind of is, talking to a bloke is the same as any other bloke.
No, because ultimately she sees all the men that she picks up on the first sort of glance, like they're all just part of like her mission, as it were. They're all just people for her to bring in. She doesn't view them as any different.
But then ultimately he kind of becomes different just because he's vulnerable towards her in a way, which all the other ones weren't, right? They were all kind of fronting. They were all trying to get in her pants, basically.
It's little details like, when he agrees to go back with her, we get the little shot showing him like pinching the skin on his hands, which is obviously, a sign of anxiety and stuff like that. And I think, that's the stuff that she picks up on him. And she ultimately does let him go, which is then when she kind of goes AWOL because, that's her going against the directive, as it were. Yeah.
And, so that's kind of that. And then we get the bit where she tries to eat food and she can't.
That's one of my favourite parts of the movie.
And it's this interesting thing where you're seeing this woman, this alien, like kind of reconciling herself to the fact that she kind of, it seems, it's, to me anyway, because obviously all this is done through implication and through facial expression and stuff like that. It seems to be that she wants to experience what it's like to be human. But ultimately there's always the fact that she's not human kind of holds her back, and it's this not quite empathy, but it's this kind of, she wants to feel empathy almost. Like it's almost it's like she tries human food. She tries to sleep with the guy that she meets on the bus, but can't for reasons that are not made entirely clear. But it would seem that her downstairs plumbing is not fully operational, I think is what's going on there. I'm not sure.
I think the implication, or at least I've read it, is that she doesn't actually have an opening.
Right, okay.
I think that she's almost like, like an Action Man or a Barbie. There is no actual, genitalia to speak of.
Okay, interesting.
Because then the scene where they're trying to have sex, it's very much sort of showing that he's trying to put it in, and he can't, because there's just nothing to put it into. He's basically just sort of, rubbing it against her thigh at one point.
Yeah, and we should talk about this guy, because he meets her, it's after the scene where she tries to eat the cake and she throws it up, she can't eat it. He meets her on the bus, where she looks like she is on a smack come down, to be frank.
Yeah, to the untrained eye, he is taking advantage of a very vulnerable woman.
Yeah, and it's obviously, the movie's kind of playing on that, I think.
Yeah.
Like, you're never entirely sure what his motives are. He seems sweet enough, but then at the same time, the guy who takes in random woman who looks like she's having a crisis probably has other things in mind, and he's certainly willing to sleep with her. But at the same time, he doesn't ever push her towards that. So
no, she very much invites him into that kind of scenario.
And this is a movie, I think, that's kind of discussing those ideas of what is predatory and what is. And the kind of is discussing these ideas around predatory behavior and vulnerability.
Yeah,
because ultimately, the woman, as the character is called, is both predatory and vulnerable, right? She is this kind of, or she has been this ruthless abductor of lonely men, but is also then kind of cast aside herself. She doesn't really have anyone to turn to. There's this kind of idea of loneliness,
Whilst we're on the subject of this guy, and I think like you were saying that they show the whole loneliness side of thing, but okay, I want to ask you, how old is this man? I need to figure this out.
Well, the answer to that, Mark, is that he's Scottish. No, that's unfair to our Scottish listeners. Many of them are very attractive. He definitely has that look where he could be anywhere between sort of 35 and 50.
Yeah, 35 to 50 is kind of my ballpark, because there's also something very odd about him. I mean, the fact that he's making her watch Tommy Cooper is wild, in my estimation. It's not what I'd call first date viewing material. Yeah,
that is quite the chirps, isn't it? Tommy Cooper and chill.
And the food that he prepares is just eggs and beans on toast, which is, again, not... wouldn't be my first choice. You'd at least order in a Wagamama's or something, surely.
That is the vibe of a man who has not felt the touch of a woman for many years, I think, is what we're supposed to glean from that.
I mean, maybe she does have, an actual set of functioning genitalia, and he's just, he just doesn't know how to thumb one in. That could also be how we read it.
Doesn't know how to thumb one in. Mark Smith, what culture? Put that on the DVD box.
No, I mean, I do think, as much as I do love this movie, I think the movie slows down a little bit at these parts. I still think it's very interesting, and it kind of still keeps that very sort of foreboding atmosphere, but the movie definitely does slow down a little bit when this character's introduced.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the point. It's kind of... It is a slowing down of the kind of thrillery aspects of the movie and kind of being more contemplative.
And settling into the more human drama, yeah.
The third act is quite slow compared to the first act, I suppose, or the first and second. This is not a movie that has any particular urgency to it. It is kind of willing to just sort of sit in these moments, and you get a lot of shots in when ScarJo is sharing the house with this guy of her just kind of staring off into the middle distance and contemplating things with her unknowable alien mind.
Yeah, and I think that will definitely be a little bit off-putting to certain people, especially because, in the first, sort of 2/3 of the movie, a lot of very weird and out there stuff happens. So, we do need to mention the void room that she takes these men into, which I believe Stranger Things may have lifted quite heavily from.
Yeah, because that came out like a couple of years after.
Yeah, I remember when Stranger Things came out thinking, hang on a minute, the Duffer Brothers big Jonathon Glazer fans by chance?
It's very similar, yeah, that's that kind of completely black void with the kind of weird glistening black oil on the floor. It's a similar image. Used in very different contexts, of course.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I think, and I love the way it's used here, and I like the fact that the first time you see the otherworld room, it's very bizarre and unsettling, and we just see these men stripping off with full erect penises, may I point out.
Oh yeah, if you want to see some dudes hanging dong, this is the movie for you.
And we're talking like, full rod as well, which is something you just don't really see in movies.
Oh, yeah.
And this movie's a 15 in this country, which is unusual, because I thought as soon as you show any kind of hard dick...
Surely it's not. Surely it's not.
Hang on, I've got the Blu-ray. I'm sure it's a 15.
Well, you're editing this so you can drop in a fact-checking mark if that's not the case.
Hang on a minute. Wait, hang on. I'm going to double-check it.
Okay.
Because I posted a picture of it. I posted a picture of the box on Instagram.
Consulting the gram, where Mark posts.
Because we are now on Instagram, which, give us a cheeky
so if
follow.
you want some thirst traps from the boys, then...
Nope, there it is, on our Instagram page. It is a 15.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
This country.
Which, again, is bizarre. I mean, the BBFC made some very interesting choices in recent years. But no, so
especially given this movie also features an attempted sexual assault later on as well.
Yeah, and the supposed death of a toddler that dies of neglect. That's another thing.
Oh yes, yeah, it's pretty grim for 15.
Yeah, it's a very grim movie overall. But so the first time a guy gets taken into her weird void room, we just see him sink below the surface into this oil while she walks atop it, and then she just puts her clothes back on and just leaves. So we don't see what happens under the surface. It's only a little bit later that we find out, when we see another guy go under there. But then we actually go under with him, and he looks around and sees another guy that's already encased within this goo, but he looks like he's already decaying. I think that's the only way you can really describe.
He's kind of desiccated, right, at one point.
Yeah, and this thing, I have seen this movie so many times. I am never prepared for this scene. This scene genuinely freaks me out because it's so... I don't even know what the word to describe it is. It really just sends shivers down my spine, this scene, because the look is already disturbing of him being desiccated, like you say, but it's in complete silence.
Yeah. Which
is just unnerving anyway. And then... how would you even describe what happens to this man, Aidan?
I can't really. I guess his skin is just kind of left flapping around, and his insides are turned into chum.
Yeah, it's almost like everything inside of his skin is just sucked out, and it's just like a, And
you see it kind of sliding up a sort of like a little ramp thing, like the goo from inside slides up it, right?
But it's just the way this man just is just destroyed, I guess. It's so bizarre. And honestly, turns my stomach and really, really puts me on edge every time I've seen this scene. And I'm just never ready for it. That's the thing.
Well, this movie is all about the destruction of the body in some regards.
Yes, this is very true.
Because we should say, just to round out this discussion, so at the end of the movie, after the attempted sex with the possibly 35, possibly 50-year-old man, ScarJo dumps him pretty quick and just starts a rambling in the Scottish wilderness, which, by the way, you can totally do. You have what's known as the right to roam, in Scotland. Mm-hmm. So the building that she finds herself in later is a bothy.
Yes,
which,
I like that word.
Yeah, which for those uninitiated is basically just a free house for anyone to stay in, basically. Who's just
like a hiker's shelter.
Yeah, it's like if you're driven away by the rain or the snow or whatever, you can stay there. Or if you just want to stay there, you can. It's pretty much free to everyone. There's certain kind of unspoken etiquettes that go on, and the man that she meets in the woods definitely breaks one of the key etiquette, which is don't rape anybody while you're there.
Yeah, bothies are a rape-free zone, and this guy clearly doesn't get that.
Yes, he tries it on. and ScarJo runs away again. There's a chase. Then he kind of, basically, long story short, he manages to get her into a position where he sees that her like skin is falling off, and there's this kind of black alien sparkly flesh beneath. And it's an interesting, because eventually the woman ScarJo sheds her human skin and is just completely in her alien form, and the guy just kind of comes back and sets her on fire, which is a grim end to this movie. But my kind of take on this, I don't know what yours is like, this movie's kind of talking about like an inhuman creature trying to figure out what it means to be human, and the conclusion that it comes away with is what it means to be human is to be victimized in some way, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of a bleak view. I don't know if I agree with the movie, if that is what it's saying, but certainly the only time we see the woman as something approaching a human woman is when she's under threat of sexual assault from a man, and then she is killed for her troubles. So I think there is this kind of implication of like what it is to be human is to fear death for a start, but also
to suffer, essentially.
To suffer and die. So that's kind of fucked.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of different readings of this movie, and I was interested to know what your sort of interpretation was, because some people have said they think it's about immigration, some people think it's about racism, some people think it's about misogyny and sexism. I can definitely understand that being one of the most common readings of this movie. Given
I think all of that is in there. I'm kind of, it's one of those things where the immigration reading I've definitely read up a bit about, because obviously we should say a couple of the guys that she comes across are immigrants themselves, and that's why they're targeted by her, because there's no one to miss them, there's that sort of thing. I don't really know how far that metaphor goes, just because if we're trying to equate aliens with immigrants, especially in the context of this movie, that has some implications that I'm kind of like not sure that's okay to say.
Yeah,
really.
When you consider the idea that she's come here to prey upon people. And there's some implications to that reading that don't sit well with me. I think one of the things that does support that in my eyes is the fact that obviously she speaks with this very standard English accent, and the first few people that she speaks to have very thick Glaswegian accents, which are basically like trying to understand a foreign language, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. I think all that stuff's definitely in there. That sense of, with no pun intended, like alienation is definitely part of it. To me, it's more about this kind of... I suppose you could say the movie's more about like difference in general than it is about like immigration or gender specifically. Although those things definitely play a role. Because obviously, like I've said, we have this kind of thing of... We see the character as both a victim. We see her as vulnerable because she's a woman. But we also see her as predatory because she's something else. And the movie definitely plays on those... that discrepancy, if you like. Because there's a lot of scenes where guys are kind of being very like sexually aggressive with her and stuff, and like obviously to us with our perception we have a way of seeing that, which is she's the victim, or she's vulnerable at the very least, right? And in the first half of the movie we kind of see that like, well, that's not the case. She's using that perceived vulnerability to her own ends. But then we literally end this movie with her nearly being sexually assaulted and then killed by a man. So we kind of have this interesting like dichotomy there with the character where, in a way, her being more empathetic, her being more human, her becoming, not to put too fine a point on it, more of a woman, is there's almost this inherited victimhood that comes with it, I think, as kind of part of it.
Yeah, and I think like on a sort of more literal level in the movie, one thing that I've always noticed is that it seems like as soon as she gets these men to the sort of grotty house that houses this void, it's almost as if she has this ability to hypnotize them or mesmerize them in some way, because the way that they act, like they walk towards her in this void just undressing, completely fixated on her. And there's even one guy who she picks up in a club who is dancing whilst taking his clothes off in this void. And I mean, obviously it's very surreal for the whole notion of the movie, but it seems like once she feels that genuine sense of empathy for the guy that she lets get away. She kind of loses that ability. I think. And I think that's kind of explored in the sense of when she meets the guy on the bus, like, he's attracted her because he sees that she might need help. It's not like she's, like, luring him in a typical way.
Yeah.
She's luring him in... Well, she's not even luring him in. He approaches her.
Yeah.
There's a lot to dissect in this movie. I think that's one of the things that I like the most about it. I like the fact there's all these different readings of this film, and everybody will sort of take away different things. I mean, personally, I've always just seen it as being more of an exploration of, like, the nature of humans, and it goes into a lot of different areas, like you say, like looking at things like victimhood and predatory behaviors and stuff like that. But I think it is ultimately, for my money, it's about an alien basically discovering what humanity is and seeing both the good and the worst possible sides of it, which ultimately ends up in her being killed.
Yeah, and I think there's this kind of again, this movie's kind of always playing with like dichotomies and that kind of thing. So as much as I think this movie is kind of it's playing with this idea of, like, to be human is to suffer, right? Is to feel victimized, is to die, is to be whatever, right? It also has this other side of it, which is like, to be human is to empathize, and that empathy can only be brought around through suffering. So it kind of has this kind of two sides of the same coin thing, where, like, you can only really be empathetic if you understand what it is to suffer yourself, is I think what the movie's saying. Which obviously there's a lot going on there, and that almost ties into, like, religious notions of, like, Jesus kind of coming down and being both human and God, right? Like, I think there's an element of that. Not that I think this is like a religious movie, and maybe this is just my...
No, I don't think at all. I mean,
this is maybe my filter coming in, but, like, is this idea of, like, this idea of something coming from somewhere else and simultaneously being, extraterrestrial or in the case of Christ, divine, and then being also human at the same time. So there's this push and pull between those two ideas, right? Where, if you'll permit me to get the most pretentious we've ever been on the pod.
By all means, my friend, do it, because as soon as you finish talking about this bit, I want to talk about the fact that ScarJo is nude in this movie.
Okay, cool. So what I'm talking about, I guess, is like, something that's always haunted me from my days of religious education is the...
oh boy.
I know, we're going there. Is the when Christ is crucified, he says, why have you forsaken me, right? That's one of the sayings of the cross. And I've always found that idea particularly disturbing, because obviously you're taught that Jesus is God on some level, right? Like, they are the same person. Yeah. But in that moment, he's truly human, because he's beseeching God to release him from his suffering. And that's no, I
totally get that.
That's something that kind of, I'm an atheist, but, like, that's something that in my head I find deeply troubling, and, like, as a part of a narrative, kind of moving. And I think this movie taps into, like, that feeling, is what I'm saying, of, like, you're watching something that is ostensibly inhuman, could not possibly ever be human, but in those final moments of suffering knows what it is to be human, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that is also kind of exemplified by the really now kind of iconic shot where she's taken off her skin, and you've got that really uncanny moment where the alien ScarJo, that still very much has her facial features, is staring at the face, the human face, which is still blinking, might I add.
Yeah.
I always find that very creepy. And yeah, I think that's somewhat exemplified by that as well.
So you wanted to talk about Tits Bum Fanny after that, yeah?
Well, it's just one point that I've always made about this film, and again, because a lot of people always sort of just know it as that film where Scarlett Johansson got naked, but, like, I feel like the presence of her doing that, and why this is so talked about, like, I've always felt like she did it for the right reasons in this movie. It's a part of the actual narrative as to why she is naked. Like, it's not done for, like, titillation reasons. No, it's done as actually part of the story.
It's not particularly sexualized either, is the thing.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's just a scene where she's stood in front of a mirror. There's some very tastefully placed shadows to stop you from seeing anything too graphic, as it were. But I've always thought that scene is just there because obviously, yeah, she's an alien that is looking at her human body and trying to understand it, and obviously she's naked at the start of the movie as well. But that's because like she's just been made, and she just gets dressed and walks away. And it's just one of those things that I want to flag up because I hear this movie get brought up for that all the time, and I'm like, I just want to say it's never done in like poor taste, I think.
And I'm here to tell you, if you're looking for this movie as like to see Scarlett Johansson naked and have a little shufty, this movie is a challenging wank, my friend.
Yeah, like you're gonna struggle. There's a good couple of minutes where you might get towards the home stretch, and then immediately it's just gonna go back in.
So we've gone from religious horror to how tough is it to wank to this movie. I think it's time to say, is this Kino or Inferno? Take the floor, Mark.
Well, it's no shocker that I'm going to say this is Kino through and through. I absolutely love this movie, and I feel like there's so much more that we could possibly, talk about. But I think we just end up talking ourselves into corners and going around in circles because there's so much of the movie that's open to interpretation as well, and I think it's very deliberately designed with that in mind.
Yeah.
Definite Kino from me. There is one last thing I wanted to just quickly slip in there. Because I feel like some people may not be overly familiar with this movie or the book. I've never read the book, admittedly. But the purpose of what ScarJo's character is doing is they are using humans as a food source.
Okay, interesting.
So that's from the book.
Yeah, was it in the movie? It's more ambiguous.
Yeah, but you kind of can get the impression from, again, when that guy gets, pulled inside out or whatever the fuck happens to him, you see like the slurry going down the pipe, which is kind of evocative of like factory farming and stuff like that. The other thing I wanted to just quickly mention, because it came up at the start of this discussion, I didn't get a chance to go back to it, is you said that somebody commented on one of our pages saying they didn't think this, or they didn't realize this movie was about aliens.
Yes.
Without prior knowledge. I'm interested by that because I think it's pretty clear from the opening.
Yeah, I think they were saying, I haven't got the comment in front of me, but I think they were saying that they viewed it as more metaphorical than literal. Whereas obviously...
Oh, fair enough. I mean, that's fair. I mean, because, the opening where she's undressing that other woman is in that pure white room, very evocative of alien imagery. And then immediately after that, it's a little bit more subtle, but when you see ScarJo descending from that grotty tower, there's lights in the sky.
Yeah. But I think he kind of was saying that like he viewed it as more of a metaphor before realizing that it was based on like a literal science fiction novel.
Right. Okay. Fair enough then. Yeah. Okay. Right. I got the vibe that they didn't pick up on that sort of stuff. So my apologies to whoever you are in the comments.
Also, I think that's perfectly valid. Like, it's if I didn't have that context, I might think like, oh, is this literal or is it metaphorical? Just to wrap it up though, I will say, I think this movie is definite Kino. It's a movie that I find more perplexing than entertaining, I'll say that. But this is an example of a movie that I find perplexing, I think, in a good way. Like, it's a movie that I'm not going to watch super regularly, but like I'll probably go back to a few more times and kind of see if my perception of the movie is different. And I think that's what great art does. It changes with you as you change. Your perception of the art can change as well, and like. I definitely had different thoughts on it this time than I did last time. I think when I first watched it, I was seeing it as this is an alien horror movie and like this is a take on that genre. Whereas this time I was seeing it more as like, okay, well maybe there's all this other stuff kind of going on, like what are we fully talking about and like what is it playing with beyond the genre trappings. I think it's just a really interesting movie, and like if you want to see Scarlett Johansson doing some good acting, this is a great example of that. And obviously Jonathon Glazer is an absolute beast. Like, this movie looks great. It's it's edited to perfection. It's
directed with precision, is what I would say.
Yeah.
It's everything is so thoughtfully put into the movie. Everything's so thoughtfully crafted. Even down to like the editing choices as well. Everything is just laser focused.
Yeah,
I think that's the other. Well, ultimately for me, not to derail you. And what you were saying, but like this film ticks so many boxes for things that I like in movies, particularly in like sort of sci-fi as well, and horror, and like particularly horror. This film disturbs me to the ends of the earth and back. I think this is it's a film that really survives off of its atmosphere.
Yeah,
I think
for sure,
like
for sure.
it just draws me in, and it just really I find it very effective. And yeah, very few films make me feel the way that this film does. And I think it's just such a credit to Jonathon Glazer as a director that he can take a very, what is ultimately, when you really kind of delve into it, it's a very simple story and just layer so much stuff on top of it and create something so, original, I would say. It is a very original movie.
Yeah, I agree. So, on that bombshell mark, I think it's high time we wrapped this puppy up and went back to defending the Earth from the alien menace.
That is true.
So, we have been Kino Inferno, as you well know by this point. You can find us on YouTube at Kino Inferno. You can find us on Twitter at Kino_Inferno. You can find us on Apple Podcasts at Kino Inferno. You can now find us on Stitcher. Plot twist, we found out what Stitcher is, and we barged our way in. You can find us on Stitcher at Kino Inferno. Next week, we are back at you again with another episode. It's going to be on proto-slasher films. Psycho versus Alice Sweet Alice. You're into it. You're into it.
Yeah, a bit more of a sort of history lesson episode, that one, I think. We're going to sort of delve more into films that helped create a genre that we're both quite fond of. And yeah, I'm quite looking forward to that one.
Yeah, I mean, there'll still be dick and fart jokes and all the rest of it, but...
well, yeah, obviously. Like, I'm going to have my dick out the entire time.
He always does, listeners. Anyway, that's been Kino Inferno. I've been Aidan.
And I've been Mark.
And I've been Tom Jones, coming at you all the way from Wales.
Sean Connery, when did you come back?
Okay, that's that then.
Is that the love between a man and a woman, or the love of a man for a fine Cuban cigar?
I bring you love.
It's bringing love. Don't let it get away.
Break its legs.
Wait! You want an alien? This is your alien.
Hello, children. I bring you love.
It's a monster! Kill it! Kill it!
It's not a monster. It's Mr. Burns.
Oh, it's Mr. Burns. Kill it! Kill it!
No, let me...